سوال بقیه ایران رو شما می‌کنید از آمریکا قبول نمی‌کنن چند ماه دیگه انتخابات میان دوره‌ای از وحشتناکی بنابراین راه اساسی مثل احمد شهر اینا اومدن تجزیه و آزاد کردن تمام حکومت آمریکا و ترکیه اینا
می‌دونی که اونا یه آکادمی نظامی تشکیل کنن. بعد اینو شنیده بودی که احمد شهر کار کرد جولانی یک دانشگاه نظامی رسما ساخته بودن اون منطقه گرینزونی که ساخته بودن توی و اونجا برای 1 سال و نیم 2 سال نیروهاشون رو تعلیم میدادن. حتی برای گراجویشن نیروها خود جولانی را سخنرانی کرد. من گزارش مفصل در BBC در این مورد بودن. یعنی اینها رو با دیسیپلین نظامی آشنا کرده بودن و آیا امکان وجود داره که ما یه همچین منطقه مثلا داشته باشیم و کردها میان وسط، اهوازها میان وسط و از اون ور من در حالی میخوام از سازمان مجاهدین هم بپرسم و برای آزاد کردن ایران، یعنی نه برای اینکه یه دیگه رو بخوان بکنن که کمک بکنن کل ایران آزاد بشه. درست میگم؟ همه
منظورم که در تهران رژیم قدیه الان رفقای ما در تهران میگن که ما نیرو از کردها 400 بیان بلوچ‌ها عرب‌ها در تهران رژیم قویه داره میزنه، ما کمک میکنیم. این مثلا این مطرح برای داخل کشور که بالاخره کمک به نظر من میشه منتها بالاخره بادرش با آمریکا رو توضیح کرد و اینکه شما میتونید اون شرایط وجود بریم کردها منطقه خودشون کنترل کنن و مثلا پیشنهادی رو بفرستن مثلا ما تمام تأسیسات رو حاضرین کنترل کنیم، محافظت کنیم و هزاران نفر، 10,000 نفر میتونیم به خیال بگیریم اگر آمریکا این شرایط وجود داره که با هلیکوپتر بزنن، آنها نمیدونن مثل چیزی که به الان توی کردستان عراق 1993
یعنی یک منطقه نوفلای زون رو به وجود بیارن از بالا حمایت بکنن که البته من نیروی هوایی رژیم کامل دیگه کوبیدن آمریکایی‌ها و بعید می‌دونم چیزی دیده باشه. گرم از این معذرت یه چیز سریع بپرسم برای سراغ محمد و بعد بریم سراغ پرسش پاسخ‌های برای پرسش من میرسونم این رو بهتون میرسونم. خواهش کنم بزنم. هر وقت همین از من اصطلاحاً می‌رسید توی بحث وارد بشید حتما وارد شید.
به نظر من حرفا بیشتر سوشال میدیا و درست کردن رأسا اول که میتونه مثبت باشه مسئله گذار از این رژیم یکیش نمیکنه واقعا هر منطقه مثلا
مرسی که گفتید اتفاقا در این مورد اصلا بحث خواهیم کرد راجع به بحث قانون اساسی. بذارید بریم من فقط خیلی سریع بپرسم از گرم آیا سازمان مجاهدین اگر بخواهید همچین اتفاق فکر می‌کنید حاضر باشه بیاد با بقیه جریانات همکاری بکنه برای اینکه ایران آزاد بشه، بعد به عنوان یک حزب سیاسی چیزی که همیشه می‌خواستن باشن بیان فعالیت کنن یا فقط می‌خوان خودشون باشن و با یک جریانی متحد نشن؟
خیلی ممنون که این سوالی کردید. مسئول رهبری گفت یعنی اینکه این سوالی که شما کردید نشون میده که حتی شما هم که به مسائل سیاسی و آگاهی دارید از طرح همبستگی ملی اطلاع ندارید. قبل از اینکه کسی بخواد راجع به همبستگی صحبت کنه طرح همبستگی ملی روی میز بود. من می‌خواستم یه نکته بگم چون دیدم که آقای منظر بود من ایشون از طریق همین سوشال میدیا و اینا آشنایی پیدا کردم و اینا مرتب روی گوشی خودش داره نگاه میکنه. این یک چیزی که الان این روزا اتفاق افتاده به اسم حبابه، یعنی هر کسی در یک حباب خاص خودش به سر میبره و کانال‌های اطلاعاتیش هم از اون حباب میگیره و روی این اصلا من یک مقاله چندین سال پیش نوشته بودم به اسم داده ها و باورها، یعنی که آدم ها یه سری اطلاعات رو میگیرن، این اطلاعات رو با مغزشون تجزیه تحلیل میکنن به صورت یه باورها و پندارها برای خودشون قرار میدن و این کانال‌های اطلاعاتیه که باورهای آدم ها رو شکل میده. سازمان مجاهدین تا جایی که من میدونم همیشه از راه حل سوم پشتیبانی کرده، یعنی در آمریکا تمام دولت‌ها چه دموکرات چه جمهوری‌ها سیاست اصلیشون این بوده که رفتار رژیم رو عوض کنن، نه اینکه خود رژیم رو عوض کنن. و روی این اصل چیز بوده که یه عده‌ای هم می‌آمدن در مورد حمله نظامی صحبت می‌کردن، یه عده خیلی زیادی هم مماشات. مجاهدین اومدن گفتن که نه حمله نظامی برای ایران، نه مماشات. شما روابطتون رو با اون رژیم قطع کنید. در ایران به اندازه کافی جوانان برومند وجود داره که بتونن این رژیم رو به زیر بکشن و الان هم حرفی که مجاهدین دارن میگن کانون‌های شورشیه که در تمام شهرهای ایران جوانان هستن، آماده هستن که این رژیم رو به زیر بکشن و نمونه‌ش هم اینه که 5 روز قبل از عملیات آمریکا 250 نفر از جوانان مجاهد در 2 حلقه 100 نفری و 150 نفری رفتن به بیت خامنه‌ای حمله کردن و این از لحاظ نظامی کسایی که من تحلیلگر نظامی نیستم، کسایی که آشنایی دارن می‌دونن که عملیات فوق‌العاده پیچیده‌ایه که می‌تونن که همچین کاری رو در بند تهران انجام بدن.
قرار باشه مجلس مؤسسانی یا پیش مجلس مؤسسانی شکل بگیره که گروه‌ها بیان کنار هم دیگه اصلا تصمیم بگیرن این چیزی که آقای بایزیدی عزیز گفتن، برای اینکه روی چیزهای ما باید توافق بکنیم. حالا روی همین دیگه در این مورد اصلا صحبت می‌کنیم که روی چه چیزی باید توافق بکنیم. روی بحث فدرالیسم آیا همه ما توافق داریم؟ روی بحث سکولاریسم آیا همه توافق داریم؟ اگر توی این گفتگوی ملی قرار باشه شکل بگیره بین همه جریان سیاسی، مجاهدین حاضر هست از توی این چیز شرکت بکنه این گفتگوی ملی؟
مجاهدین قبل از اینکه
من قبول دارم مجاهدین بایکوت شده ولی یه بخشی از این بایکوت به خودشون هم مربوط، خود بایکوتی هم دارن.
مجاهدین قبل از اینکه کسی برنامه به طرح 10 ماده‌ای خانم مریم رجبی اومد روی میز و کسانی که با سیاست آمریکا آشنایی دارن این طرح جفرسونیان محسوب میشه و با تمام ارزش‌های آمریکا هماهنگی داره. آقای منظرپور یه چیزی در مورد ترامپ و اینا بود. پرزیدنت ترامپ یه شخصیت خاص خودش داره که در قالب ریپابلیکن های سنتی نمیگوجه و مسلما در قالب دموکرات ها نمیگوجه و این اگر بخواد پرزیدنت ترامپ رو بشناسیم، سفر که پرزیدنت ترامپ کرد به انگلیس و جلوی ملکه شروع به راه رفتن کرد، این خیلی گویا بود که پرزیدنت ترامپ از هیچ نوع حکومتی که بر پایه موروثی باشه و بر پایه ژن برتر باشه و بر پایه این باشه که خدا شاه میهن و اینا پشتیبانی نمیکنه. تو حرفایی که زده میگه مردم ایران باید تصمیم بگیرن که چرا حکومتی رو میکنن. و این حالا مسلما یعنی اصلا نمیدونم، من اولین بار امیر فخرآور اولین که اومده بود توی امریکا شناختم، همون موقع عضو فعال کانون دوستداران فرهنگی ایران بودم و سخنرانی امیر رو من با خیلی زحمت کشیدم تا توسط هیئت مدیره
فقط هم بهم حمله شد در حین سخنرانی
قبول شد و اینا، یعنی جلیقه ضد گلوله رو پوشیده بودم تا امیر آوردیم و سخنرانی کرد، چون خیلی کانتروورسی بود و چیزی که من از امیر خیلی خوشم اومد همین طرح قانون اساسی بود، پیشنویس قانون اساسی برای آینده ایران تو سال 2017. من همینجا بودم، با امیر بودم و این دفترچه رو معرفی کرد که از اون یعنی من فکر نمی‌کنم که هیچ گروهی با قانون و قانونگرایی مخالفت داشته باشه، از جمله شورای ملی مقاومت، سازمان مجاهدین خلق ایران ولی به طور مشخص من ازشون پرسیدن گفتن که طرح در مورد خانم مریم رجبی اصول‌بندی یه قانون اساسی دموکراتیکه و اونو و یه مقایسه تطبیقی هم با قانون اساسی جمهوری اسلامی انجام دادن و این اصول اگر لحاظ شده باشه ما قبول.
درود محمد، فکر می‌کنی که طرح در مورد مجاهدین و خانم رجبی که هستیم که ما باهاش دربارش اصلا صحبت بکنیم در کنار بقیه پیشنهادات مثل یه پیشنهاد مثلا؟
من خواستم بگید تاکید بکنم روی فرمایش دوستمون از آقای بایزی. واقعیت اینه که ما الان در یک مقطعی هستیم از تاریخ ایران که رژیم حاکم در حال سقوطه. این رژیم حاکم یک عالمه ذهنیت ایجاد کرده در رابطه با اینکه اگر من ثابت بشم این بلاها سر کشور ما بود. مثال هر کدوم از etnicity ها سعی میکنن یه بخشایی از کشور رو جدا بکنن. مجاهدین خلق میان و قانونهای شورشی رو پایه‌های ضد دموکراتیک خواهند کرد. اساساً کنش اپوزیسیون باید اینجوری باشه که اون رو تحقیق نکنه، یعنی عملکرد سازمان‌های اتنیک به گونه‌ای نباید باشه که همون سناریویی که جمهوری اسلامی نسبت بهش هشدار داده بود رو اون رو احیا بکنه. تمام سازمان‌ها، تمام جریانات اجتماعی باید حق فعالیت و مطالبات سیاسی در چارچوب یک ایران دموکراتیک داشته باشه، ولی نه به اون صورتی که ما دقیقاً مترسکی بسازیم از اون طرح خطرناکی که جمهوری اسلامی در عرض این مدت تو کله مردم کرده. من به شما عرض میکنم به محض اینکه ما شاهد نمیدونم نو-فلای زون و امثال اون باشیم، مقدار زیادی از مردم عادی در ایران دچار هراس میشن که آقا قرار نیستش که این این کشور باقی بمونه، قراره که تیکه تیکه بشه، ما دیگه در خیابان شرکت میکنیم و مؤلفه مهمی که برای این فاز نهایی عبور از نظام وجود داره مردم عادی هستند. یعنی در نهایت این مردم هستن که با حضور خودشون در خیابون از سنندج گرفته تا مشهد، از مشهد گرفته تا زاهدان، از زاهدان گرفته تا اهواز، اون مردم عادی هستن که بزرگترین موتور بزرگی براندازی هست. خلق عرب و نمیدونم جیش العدل و این سازمان ها اینا موتور بزرگی براندازی نیستن. موتور بزرگی براندازی مردم ایران هست.
محمد، آیا اینها جزئی از مردم ایران هستند؟
بله، جزئی از مردم ایران هستن، ولی این اتفاقی که الان افتاده برکت این عزیزان نبوده. من نمیگم که
همه با هم دیگه، چون مردم ایران که مفهوم چیزی که نداره جدای از دونه این اجزا، اینا همه
داره قطعا داره. من فکر میکنم مثلا هیچ بخشی از مردم ایران رو ما میتونیم اختصاص بدیم به یک جریان سیاسی مثلا خاص. مردم ایران پدیده ورای نمیدونم فلان حزب و فلان سازمان و فلان تشکیلات شبه نظامی هستن و اگر که ما اون ایماژ رو تقویت بکنیم به نظر من داریم تنفس مصنوعی بدیم به ایدئولوژی رژیم که مرده، ولی ما داریم به ایدئولوژیش تنفس مصنوعی بدیم.
Mohammed, I want to ask an unusual request right now to switch from Persian language to English language since now, because we have our special guests, Dr. John Lenchowski, joining us, and Claire Lopez, and other guests. We don't want to torture them with speaking Farsi. Just switch to English and then.
Would you like me to repeat what I said?
No, not that part, because it is part of the fight between our opposition. I don't want to do that part. But this is the dialogue. What is called whatever dialogue between the different opposition groups. We want to find a solution, the best solution to come together, and it's normal. Let's wrap it up. And all the speakers, I want all of you to stay with us. We will continue this discussion the rest of the day, since we have been a little behind. And you can finish your part, and then if you all are okay, we will do the question and answer after the part of the award ceremony and listening to the very interesting remarks of Dr. Lenchowski. You can finish.
I'm just going to finish off by saying that so far, in Operation Epic Fury, the acting forces, especially the United States, has succeeded in capturing the hearts and minds of the Iranian nation. I think a great majority of Iranians are in support of the operations which are leading to the very fast collapse of the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime. What I'm warning is that nobody should do anything which would damage that solidarity with this action. If we start, even considering making separate partitions within Iran, or bringing paramilitary forces from different ethnic or political groups into the dimensions of what's happening in Iran, this would automatically disengage the Iranian public from what's happening. That's my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Before we lose the train of thought, every Iranian and the country belongs to all of us. No matter what ethnicity we are, no matter what religion we are, Iran is Iran, and we're all Iranians, and we all equally share that heart. So I feel like if we're going to cut a group of people and accuse them with this has happened throughout the years by the regime, every time we wanted to gather together, they're like, the Kurds are separatists, the Baluchis are separatists, they're scaring us of separatists coming in, cutting the country into pieces, which is not true. We've had, last week, the Kurds get together in Canada, they came together, they had a coalition, and they're not separatists. They're not separatists. So the fact that we even promote this ideology will just draw them away from us instead of uniting us. And this is what we've done throughout these years. We've divided them. We've scared them. You're separatists, get away. The only question I have with Mr. Torshidi, the comment that I have. Okay, Reza Pahlavi says, I have my Munich plan. You guys say we have our 6-point plan. I mean, we have to get together and have a plan. We have our own constitution that we will be promoting. We all have to get together, and it's already late, but we have to do it ASAP. Because we're always complaining, nobody gets together. Okay, now it's too late. We have to get together. So it can't be, okay, agree on my plan and I'll leave it. We have to think of a new plan, which all of us will agree. And we're already late. I really hope that this kind of communication between all of us brings us together, but it's got to be fast. Days.
Thank you so much for this question. If you look at the slogans that the National Council of Resistance of Iran is saying, it says, "Don't be the oppressor, be the show of the world." This is kind of behavior we not like oppressor. This has to do a lot with the answer. And then Reza Pahlavi comes with done with Mullah, done with Mujahid, and done with. See, it's not a behavior, it's identity. Whoever says I'm left, you need to be eliminated. Who is again saying I'm Mujahid should be eliminated. Who is saying I'm Mullah should be eliminated. And then in Berlin, after his talk, then the guy comes in and says the fascist slogan that one leader, one flag, one country. So you cannot talk to people who have this. Reza Pahlavi should first.
May I ask nicely?
Yeah, listen.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
This question.
Can you
This
listen?
is very, very interesting. You see, what is happening is there has to be an acknowledgement that Iran is not one country, one people. Iran is the most pluralistic. You know, Iran is composed at least of 6 major nationalities: Arabs, Persian, Kurd, Baluch, Turkmen, Lurs. Okay? So during the pandemic and Islamic Republic, they called us Arab every name you name it. In 1961, the CIA said there were 3 million Arabs. Iran was 25 million people. Now Iran, 90 million. They still call. They said we are 3 million. We are 10 million. So the point is that these groups, nationalist groups, whether Pahlavi, whether Mujahideen, whether Republican, now that they need us to keep Iran together. But there has to be acknowledgement that Iran is the most that Iran is belong to the Arabs as much as it belongs to the Persians. They don't acknowledge. For the future, there has to be an acknowledgement that the Arabs, our minimum demand is the pluralistic republic. I'm trying to federal. That is not only decentralized. Some people try to say, okay, we believe it's decentralized, different than having a constitution like the United States. Okay? So,
Mr. K, we will go there. It's the next panel to talk about it. Definitely.
I just want to finish my thought.
We want you to talk about it as much as possible.
So, unless they acknowledge there will be a devolution of power to the people, and not only decentral, but is a republic and federal. Okay? Otherwise, why should we come? Okay? Topple the regime, get killed, and start all over again, calling us out of something or secessionist. So now is the time that you guys have to decide. Are we?
I'm sorry, but you're not being killed for toppling the regime.
Let's do this. Let's resume this panel. We will continue. Mr. Manzarpour, Mr. Abdian, and thank you all of you. And we'll come this day after remarks of the Legislature. We will go to continue this discussion. It's just the start. Thank you. Thank you so much. In our quest for freedom and democracy, let's watch this one. Which one is it? Oh, just pause it for now. We are behind that. I don't want to waste it's very bad time. We have seen a lot of help during our quest for freedom and democracy in Iran. And specifically, as I told you before, this help, most of it came from the United States. And do we have that one on or no? If we're going to talk English, I want to, for a few minutes, just say the Farsi about Dr. Nechovsky, then I will introduce him in English. دکتر لنچوفسکی برای شما خواهد گفت از ریشه‌ای که داره و علاقه‌ای که داره به ایران، چرا براش انقدر ایران مهمه. یکی از شخصیت‌های بسیار تاثیرگذار است در پشت پرده واشنگتن و شاگردان بسیاری رو تربیت کرد که الان توی سمت‌های کلیدی هستن توی دولت پرزیدنت ترامپ و از سال 2010 من ایشون رو میشناسم و let's switch to English. Since 2010 I know Dr. John Lenchovsky. When I started to be part of IWP, the Institute of World Politics, I was the research fellow and visiting lecturer there. I was lecturing and learning a lot in that institute. Dr. Lenchovsky himself will tell us what was the building of IWP before collapse of Soviet Union. Are you going to talk about that part or no? If you like, you can talk about it because it was one of the official buildings of the Soviet Union. And then after the collapse of Soviet Union, since Dr. Lenchovsky served at the Reagan administration for 4 years at the National Security Council and at the State Department too. I'm sure you are going to mention all those. And he knew better than anybody that what is the problem in Iran, which is in one word, Russia. He's going to tell us about that, about the history of that problem. And in 2010, when I went to Dr. Lenchovsky's office, and I said, we are working on a constitution for future Iran, because we realized the problem is the constitution. I exactly remember that moment when Dr. Lenchovsky told me, he stood and picked a book from the bookshelf and said, Amir, you need to read this. That was the Federalist Papers. And he said, just follow the guideline of American founding fathers. For years, I was looking for an answer. When I was in prison, under torture, when I was in medical school, when I was in law school in Iran, when I was everywhere in the Evin prison, Qasr prison, the Revolutionary Court, Islamic Revolutionary Court, and me and my friends, in our fight, we were looking for an answer. Okay, which way we should go for our future? And Dr. Lenchovsky gave me the best direction, best guidance, and said, just look what the American founding fathers, they have done. It took a decade for me to complete my research about that. And finally, last year, the book, the split of the constitutional law came out, which is, Dr. Lenchovsky, you have a lot of contribution in this book. And it's written by my beautiful wife, Dr. Sana Zalasti, and by myself. This is a textbook right now. Probably it's the only textbook from the right side of history. Which one is bothering which one? And these are on. Can you check it to see which one is on and stuff? You should, Sadaf, you should check the mics here and see which one is on. Okay. Dr. Lenchovsky's parents, they met in Tehran, met each other. And that's the connection. Nobody can tell you the story better than him. And before going there, for going to hear his amazing remarks, it's our honor to give the Lifetime Achievement Award this year, in this conference, in this situation, to Dr. Lenchovsky. It was 16 years ago when you helped us to start this movement for transitioning Iran to a democratic and free nation. And right now, finally, we can see it's possible and it's happening. And for all your help, all your support, all these years, please don't stop until Iran is free and you can go back in Iran and probably doing the skiing on, what was that, the water ski on Mazandaran, the north of Iran? Yeah, it was, you had some type of these experiences over there. And please give it to Dr. Lenchovsky and ask him to hear and accept our award from Personal
Thank about this situation in Iran, both in light of the history and current events. But since Amir mentioned it, I thought I would just share with you a few words about my family's history with Iran. During World War II, my father, George Lechowski, was a Polish diplomat. He at first was stationed in Tel Aviv, and then he joined the Polish army in North Africa and fought at the Battle of Tobruk. Eventually, he went to the Polish officer candidate school in the Gaza Strip, of all places, and then was called back to the Foreign Service, where he was stationed in Tehran as a press attaché. It was there that he met my mother, Rania, who had escaped from the Soviet Union. She had been arrested by Stalin's secret police in 1939, right after the Soviet invasion of Poland. She was arrested because she was a class enemy. Why? She went to college, and her father was a small businessman. And so they sent her to prison in part of the whole Gulag archipelago system in the Soviet Union, where she was there for 2.5 years and survived only by the grace of God. Anyway, she managed to get out of there and hitchhiked with a girlfriend across Central Asia to Iran, where she became head of the labor and social welfare section of the Polish embassy there. And she met my father there at a New Year's party. They were married 2.5 months later. Quick decision. Anyway, she worked with her Iranian colleagues to help find jobs and shelter for hundreds of thousands of Poles who had been arrested by Stalin and were escaping the Soviet Union and came out of the Gulag, and Iran welcomed them with an incredible national charitable heart. It was a joy for the Poles to be welcomed this way after the suffering that they had gone through in the Soviet prisons and the slave labor camps. So, my parents witnessed the Tehran conference of Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin, where pretty much the first decisions for handing over Poland and half of Europe to the Soviet Union took place. And then later on, there were, despite Poland's massive contributions to the war effort against the Nazis, whether it was the Polish pilots in the Black Battle of Britain, or their intelligence operations, which uncovered the Enigma communication system of the Nazis. Despite all of those contributions, the Yalta Agreement, my parents' country was handed over to Stalin. So after that, my parents came to America, and my father became a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, where he was one of the pioneers of the study of the Middle East in the United States. He wrote voluminously on these matters, and he wrote an enormous amount on Iran. He traveled to Iran, I think, every year for about 30 years until the revolution. He had many audiences with the Shah. He knew many people in the government there. He was both doing his research and serving as doing political risk analysis for major corporations that were doing business in the Middle East. He even was involved in help contributing to the education of the Crown Prince. And I accompanied my parents to Iran for 3 summers before the revolution. And it was an extraordinary experience. I fell in love with the country and its people. My mother, meanwhile, became an expert on Persian art and lectured a lot about this. And I ended up being the beneficiary of an inheritance of beautiful Persian miniatures and Persian carpets. So we've had a great family experience with the country. The Iran that I saw was modernizing at a very fast pace. The economy was growing. There were more Iranian students coming to American universities than there were students from any other country in the world. This was under the Shah. He was letting everybody come. They could study whatever they wanted. He just didn't want them to come and overthrow him when he came back. So, when they came back. Anyway, as you know, there were many forces in Iran seeking radical political change. There were the advocates of democracy, many of whom had studied here in the United States. There were striking oil industry workers. There were the mullahs, of course, led by Ayatollah Khomeini. There was the Tudeh party, which had long-time Soviet assistance, and it was and constituted the latest effort on the part of the Soviet Union and Russia before it to take over Iran. And I'd like to reflect a little on this. I'd like to elaborate a little bit about this because it is forgotten that Iran was the victim of Russian imperialism for centuries. Let's remember, for centuries. And the first serious efforts by Russia to take over Iran began under the Tsar Peter the Great in the 1720s. This involved attacks on parts of the Caspian coast, establishing Russian military presence on Iranian territory, and the beginning of serious Russian interference in internal Iranian affairs. In the early 1800s, about a century later, we saw the first and then second Russo-Persian wars and Russia's seizure of large parts of the Persian Empire in the Caucasus, including Georgia, Armenia, Dagestan, and Nakhchivan. Then we saw the Bolsheviks' efforts to establish the Persian Republic of Gilan in 1920, which was the first effort to establish a communist state on Iranian soil. And then we saw the Soviets try to establish, well, they did establish, the so-called Republic of Azerbaijan in 1945. Again, another attempt to establish a communist foothold in Iran. In subsequent years, the Tudeh party was active, but it was underground, working with Moscow to seize power when a revolutionary moment presented itself. And let's remember, the Russians, for centuries, have dreamed of what they like to say, dipping their toes in the waters of the Persian Gulf. So the Tudeh party had its operatives, but it had its front organizations, which were important influences in creating opposition to the Shah's rule. So while the party had to operate underground, its fronts would work out in the open. They included a women's front, a youth front, a parliamentary front organization, a labor front, and even a military front. And how much influence they all had is very difficult to measure. But these types of communist fronts have been masters at political organization and mass mobilization. And we see today, for example, in our own country, Communist China has about 1,000 front, almost 1,000 front organizations operating in this country. And they are influencing all sorts of things. They've been involved in helping mobilize, for example, the people, these demonstrations in Minnesota that we've been reading about. And this is, and so there's funding that comes from China, front organizations operating. Almost no reporting about this, except by a few of us who pay attention to Chinese attempts to subvert the United States. Anyway, the Ayatollah's regime that came to power had a toxic ideology, whose consequence was the repressive state apparatus under which the Iranians had to chafe for decades. And I segue segue into this discussion of the ideology because it is not unrelated to the communist attempts to take over Iran over many years. This ideology was based on a new version of Shiite Islam that had been promoted by Iranian scholar Ali Shariati. It was called Red Shiism, as I understand it, and it proposed that Shiite Islam should not be a contemplative faith, but one dedicated to a revolutionary change of an unjust social and political order. Ayatollah Khomeini adopted this vision along with other radical revisions to traditional Shiite Islam. He incorporated Maoist ideas about people's war into his ideology. And then we saw the likes of Ayatollah Khamenei, who saw fit to translate the works of Sayyid al-Qutb. Who's he? The most radical ideologist of the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, another group that has borrowed heavily from Marxist-Leninist ideology to round out its ideological vision. It should be noted that Khamenei was educated in the Soviet Union's Patrice Lumumba Friendship University, which was actually a recruiting mechanism for future spies for the Soviet Union, and perhaps more importantly, agents of influence who would serve Soviet strategic interests in their countries of origin. Was Khamenei a Soviet-Russian agent? I don't know. But the Ayatollah's governing structures and many of their governing methods closely mirror those of the old Soviet system. When one looks at the animating ideology and these oppressive governing methods, we can reasonably conclude that the Ayatollah's project can be called a version of totalitarian Islamism, with a quasi-religious ideology that would have been unrecognizable to previous centuries of Shiite adherents. I should note here that there is a movement in the Islamic world led by the largest Muslim organization in the world, the Nahdlatul Ulama, which is based in Indonesia, and it's dedicated to restoring Islam to being a genuine religion as opposed to a radical political ideology. I happened to have traveled there in August and lectured to the top 20 leaders of this largest Islamic organization in the world, and it's really quite astonishing what they're doing because they have successfully fought the radical jihadists within Indonesia, and now they're trying to bring the strength of their organization and their influence to try to moderate Islam elsewhere in the world. The former president of the Nahdlatul Ulama was a guy named Abdurrahman Wahid, who became actually president of Indonesia, and he wrote a book entitled The Illusion of an Islamic State. And in it, he argues that those who are seeking one version or another of Islamic caliphate are motivated by a secular passion for political power and are not motivated by genuine religion. He says that they who are so motivated will never achieve an Islamic state until they achieve the state of personal holiness. And now they're taking this message worldwide, and they're making efforts to bring together the world's great religions around shared civilizational values. They want Islam to become a solution for problems in the world rather than the source of problems. The Iran that we've seen since 1979 has been a never-ending source of problems. It has been implicated in countless terrorist acts. lawless behavior, violating all sorts of the norms of diplomacy and international law now for decades. It has been a logical partner, if not ally, of both the old Soviet Union and now Russia, which is being re-totalitarianized by Putin, and it is also serving as a de facto friend and ally of communist China. And both Russia and China, of course, are revisionist, imperialist powers who reject the time-honored principles of international law and the protection of human rights. This axis has become seriously threatened by the current attacks on the mullah's regime. And if the regime collapses, Russia's influence in Iran and its future prospects for taking over more parts of the country will be seriously diminished. In my opinion, this is all for the good. And Iranians should remind themselves, if they don't want to become an eventual Iranistan, they should be friends with America and the West. A new regime in Tehran could well prove to choose customers for its valuable oil, other than communist China, whose Belt and Road Initiative has depended heavily on Iranian participation. So what will Iran's future be? It depends enormously on the Iranian people and the degree to which they can change their psychology. They have to shed a fatalistic acceptance of their lot. They have to move away from an attitude of futile resignation. In other words, a hopeless sense that resistance is futile. They have to build sufficient courage to exercise people power. And people power isn't just 10,000 people taking to the streets. It's 1 million people taking to the streets. You know, when we were helping to put straws on the Soviet camel's back, we did a lot of material pressure. We had a military buildup. We supported the Afghan anti-communist resistance who were fighting the Soviet invading forces. We deprived the Soviets of hard currency earnings by lowering the global oil price. We restricted our technology exports to them. Lots of material pressure. But ultimately, when we were connecting with the peoples of the Soviet Empire through our broadcasts, through all sorts of methods of distributing literature, helping the resistance forces inside the Soviet Empire to communicate with one another, and somehow this helped change the psychology of the peoples in that empire. When Pope John Paul II came to Poland, 2 million people show up to celebrate Mass. And they all looked at each other and they said, there's more of us than there is of them. And ultimately, 1 million people took to the streets of Moscow. Vast, similar numbers to the streets of Tashkent and Tbilisi and Vilnius. And it was this that impressed upon the Soviet armed forces and the other security forces to stop shooting straight at their own fellow countrymen. And many of them started to defect to the opposition. This is what has to happen in Iran. So much depends here on the ability of opposition groups to cast aside their differences. And I can see that this is what you're talking about here. But particularly, you have to cast aside, individual opposition groups have to cast aside their own egotistical passion for political power in order to unite in opposition. It's important to remember the example of George Washington, who, after a successful presidency, there were others who thought, well, let's just make him king because he's a truly great leader. And he stepped down voluntarily from power. He was not motivated by a secular passion for political power. He was motivated to serve a cause higher than himself. And if so long as ego is going to dominate individual, and I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying it's the greatest threat to political change in Iran is when the leaders of opposition groups let their ego and their passion for their own political power be more important than serving the cause of unity and ultimate opposition to the regime. So, once the regime collapses, that's the time when political differences can be sorted out. And the solution, which the Iranian National Congress has offered, is a constitutional assembly that ideally, in my book, should use the U.S. Constitution as a model. And this model, I consider it to be a genius document. And it serves several purposes, and I will mention just two of them because there are many more. One aspect about our document, is how it is designed to protect society from the inevitable evils that we can expect from people in power who succumb to the temptation to do the wrong thing. One of the most important insights of our founders was articulated by James Madison, who said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But men are not angels, and they're not going to be made into angels through social, political, economic, or genetic engineering. The only way men can start becoming truly holy, so to speak, is by individual moral struggle. And so this recognition of the immutability of human nature is absolutely key to effective government. And that means that you have to recognize that we will never get rid of the temptation to do the wrong thing. And that the Constitution protects us. Our Constitution protects us with diffusion of power, separation of powers, checks and balances, the rule of law, and so on and so forth. So as you contemplate the future, I reiterate Amir's counsel that you familiarize yourself with the Federalist Papers. I tell my students, if you're well-educated people, these are graduate students at IWP, where we teach. We have 8 master's degree programs, 3 doctoral programs. By the way, anybody who wants to go to school, send them to us. I tell my students, if you've not read the Federalist Papers, you can't really consider yourself an American yet. So, I also recommend that you're familiar with the work of the anti-federalists. And these are the people who were so distrustful of excessively centralized power that they gave us the Bill of Rights in order to protect us against, and that's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. So let me just conclude by extending my best wishes to everybody here and to the people of Iran, whose proud heritage of several thousand years deserves to be continued under a civilized and humanitarian government based on the rule of law, respect for the dignity of the individual human person, and the God-given rights possessed by each individual by virtue of their humanity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Lenchowski, to accepting it. It was surprised because when you were talking, I was thinking about it. The Federalist paper. You know, the people we have here, they are from different group of oppositions. And they are courts, they are all Iranians, Arabs, Azeris, they are from Balochistan, Sistan, Balochistan, and we have laws, we have Fars, we have everybody from everywhere in Iran. And it's a big discussion. When the American founding fathers, they came together 250 years ago. It's the 250th anniversary of birth of this amazing nation. They came together around the table in Independence Hall. Then it was 13 colonies back then. They had there, and they wanted to find some way to govern after they won the war. And it was independency, but they didn't know what to do. They wanted to draft a constitution and make sure these colonies, they are not losing the power they do have. They had back then in their part. Then they came up with the idea of federal constitution, federal republic for the United States of America. Do you think now Iran can use that model? Because many Iranians, when you're talking about federalism, the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, it's separatist. They are talking about tajziya in Farsi. But the federalism is not separatism. And do you think the model of the United States will work for Iran, for the future constitution?
I think it would, as one of your participants here was saying, that we have Azeris and Kurds and Arabs and Baluch and Persians and Turkmen, and many of these national groups retain their own identity and yet have lived under Persian rule harmoniously for quite some time. Perhaps there have been ups and downs in these relationships, but this is not dissimilar from the sense that individual states here in the United States have their own identity. Different states have their own official religions in the early days of the Republic. There were Congregationalists up in New England, and there were Baptists, and there were Anglicans, and so on and so forth. And so there are sectarian differences here. There would be, if it hadn't been for the Civil War and the federal attempt which ended up succeeding in where the federal government imposed a national standard of human rights and making slavery illegal and trumping states' rights, because that's what happened at the end of the Civil War. There probably would be much more individual identity from each of the states. But the constitutional arrangement manages to, we have this diffusion of power where it's not all centralized in Washington, and it is diffused from federal to state to local government, and the states have their own laws and their own ways of doing things, and so it's each state can have its own experiments in governance. Some of them have better economies than others, but yet everyone is united and everyone is an American. And the Constitution permits this to take place, and I see no reason why something similar to that cannot be effective in Iran and make it. This is the kind of thing that should have been done in Afghanistan, for example. If we tried setting up a strong central government with a very powerful government in Kabul, and without sufficient respect for each of the individual tribes. And those the principal loyalty in Afghanistan is to the tribe and not to the government in Kabul. And I happen to have thought, as much as I love democracy, that the only traditional way in Afghanistan, and I'm not saying that this applies to Iran, would have been to restore the king, because the king respected the autonomy of the tribes, and the tribes respected his inheritance of the monarchical charisma. And if they were to try, you could still have a constitutional monarchy, and you can have, it's still possible to have, the monarch be more a head of state rather than a head of government, which is the way it is in Great Britain and other places like that.
I'm sure they have a lot of questions, but since you mentioned that part, before going to them, I want to ask about the couple of experiences. The couple of experiences the United States had, World War II, for example, post-war Japan, General Douglas MacArthur, and he was leading the American army and the Allied army. Then they won the war. Japan was defeated with the nuclear bomb. Then General Douglas MacArthur, he had a vision. It was a vision. He said, okay, let's ask them to go and draft the Constitution, because he knew the Constitution worked in the United States. And then he asked Japanese to go and draft the Constitution. It's the first chapter of my book. And they drafted the Constitution, brought it in front of him. He looked at it and said, your emperor is still the supreme power. And where is the women's right to vote? And those Japanese said, you know what? The women are not as equal as men in our country. And he said, no, it is. Be quiet. You don't know how to draft the Constitution. He threw that Constitution to trash can, General Douglas MacArthur, and said, you are defeated. You lost the battle. You lost the war. And then he gave ultimatum to his staff members. 1 week ultimatum. Told them, go and draft Constitution for Japan. In 1 week. They did it. General Douglas MacArthur's staff members, the Americans, based on the United States Constitution, drafted the Constitution for Japan. And that is the longest standing constitution without any amendment for the last 30 years. Japan came up from a destroyed nation, a severe enemy of the United States, to a great friend and ally of the United States and part of G7. And even the President of the United States back then was not happy with General Douglas MacArthur. And President Truman fired him. And even he didn't know about the mission of drafting the new constitution for Japan. But let's fast forward to Iraq and Afghanistan. It was decades later. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the US Army had done a great job to remove a dictator, Saddam Hussein, from the power, to remove a terrorist group from the power. And then the State Department came to the picture and asked the army to back off. Then the State Department signed a contract with some professors, constitutional law professors in Harvard Law School, the far leftists, led by a Jewish professor called Noah Feldman, to draft a constitution for Iraq and help the constitution of Afghanistan. And that Harvard Law School professor, the first thing he had done was to call the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime of Iran, to help us draft a constitution for Iraq and Afghanistan. And guess what happened? Islam became the official religion in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And both countries said, oh, we are Islamic Republic now. That was wrong. It was failure in Iraq and Afghanistan because of that, in my opinion. And in Japan, Germany, Western Europe, it was the success of American Constitution, the first written constitution follow. If we, right now, we the Iranian people, we want to have a constitution, is it okay to follow that path of General Douglas MacArthur and just accept that the American Constitution is the best, and based on that Constitution, draft one to use it as a framework and to have it for us, or we should just go and have Islam as official religion, or find something else somewhere, I don't know, from the communist China or something else. What is the best solution? You want to stay before?
Yeah, well, very good. Thank you so much. You know, as you're talking about Afghanistan, it reminds me that the current Supreme Court Justice, Elena Kagan, was the dean of Harvard Law School back in that time of the early 2000s after 9/11. And one of her protege students was a young man named Noah Feldman.
OMG.
And it is under their leadership that new constitution for Afghanistan was drafted and promulgated in 2004.
So such as brought back the Taliban to power.
I mean, all you have to do with that Afghan constitution is read about Articles 1, 2, and 3. Skip the rest. Articles 1, 2, and 3 begin with, this shall be an Islamic republic. Number 2, no law, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but no law shall contradict Islamic law or Sharia.
Is Iranian Islamic constitution?
Yeah, our own Supreme Court Justice right now is the one that helped to promote that and influence that Afghan constitution.
Pathetic.
That's the best response we can get. And you know the first word of the alphabet of constitutional law, I'm teaching constitutional law, American constitutional law for more than a decade. First is you cannot have an official religion or ideology in the Constitution. It's the first thing you should know. How the constitutional law professors at Harvard Law School didn't know that, and how come the State Department have made such a mistake. And you know what? The biggest problem is, after 2.5 centuries, we don't have any supervisory office at the State Department or at the Congress to supervise the constitution drafting for all these nations who are looking to have help from the United States. Do you think the IWP can help to create that office now?
We're not an advocacy organization. We are the only professional school of national security and international affairs that teaches American founding principles. And we have countless students who have been undereducated in civics, basic civics. There's been a precipitous decline in the study of American political philosophy. Not to mention moral philosophy. I mean, we have become our elites have become a pack of philosophical illiterates, and I think it has catastrophic consequences. People have, the State Department has long failed to pay attention to the role of ideas, values, and belief systems in international politics. And so the whole idea, for example, of ideological warfare as an instrument of statecraft is missing from U.S. foreign policy. In the old Soviet Union, ideological war was the center of everything. The #1 America expert, Americanologist in the old Soviet Union was a guy named Georgy Arbatov. And Arbatov's main book was called The War of Ideas in International Politics. It's what made his career. And yet we are, completely tone deaf to these things, which is why I mentioned a few things about the Ayatollah's ideology here, because there's a direct relationship between ideology and the ruling, the fate of people. So, anyway, there.
Yeah, to your point, Dr. Lankowski, just in the last couple of years, certainly with the beginning of the second now Trump administration, our voice of America, our voice in all kinds of radio broadcasts all over the world, Radio Farda for the Persian speaker, Farsi speakers, Iran, Radio Marti, Cuba, Radio Free Asia for over there, China, Taiwan. The funding, Al-Qaeda for the Middle East, funding has been gutted. And I think that is an extremely important point, that we do not understand fundamentally how ideas can and must and are shaped. And that the leadership, if we are going to be the leader of this free world, we have to be in the business of helping to shape ideas. So, when I was first thinking about what I would say when we came together here today, I was exactly thinking about our foundational documents, certainly the Federalist Papers, but the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence. And what comes to mind for me as we think about how the Iranian people can craft for themselves a new constitution is that what has to precede the writing of that constitution or be part of it is the ideas, as you were mentioning, the foundational principles, the first things principles, have to be enunciated, articulated, and agreed upon among all of those participating in that drafting, in that creation of a new form of government for Iran. And I think that our own documents form an excellent foundation and a basis for doing that. Beginning with well, I will mention here the 10-point plan of Madame Rajavi of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which takes off on many of those bills, Bill of Rights, our amendments, our Constitution, that begin with crafting, creating a new democratic, secular, non-nuclear, no weapons of mass destruction, republic. What does republic mean? Republic is two words from the Latin, res and publica. Res means the thing, publica, thing. What is the public thing? It's the law, it's the Constitution. And so that has to be first, and the principles that will undergird it and imbue it must be agreed upon first. And we can look to no better place than our own foundational documents from Federalist Papers, the Bill of Rights, First Amendment, five liberties guaranteed, right? Freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and right to petition the government for redress of grievances. All of those things, I think, would be welcome among most of the Iranians that we're thinking of, all of the groups, all of the different ethnic groups, and go from there. Start with those things. Go from there. Gender equality, protection of the minorities, rights of the minorities to their own education system, language to teach the children in. An absolute abolishing of any support for Islamic jihadi terrorism, abolishing the death penalty. We could go on, but let's discuss it some more.
The reason we have this discussion now, because President Trump and the U.S. Army and the Benjamin Netanyahu Israeli army, they killed Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader. As long as I remember, since I was 16 and was first arrested because of criticizing that monster for last 34 years. I had this fight. Many people in this room, they had their fight against this regime longer than that even. And now suddenly he is dead. And
So is the entire...
oh yeah, that was a breaking news today, that the entire corporate gone. Have you heard about that?
No.
This is a bomb. And those people who are picking the next supreme leader. The thing is happening in Iran, and you know, we are that close to the fulfill the revolution and then go for the next step to draft the constitution. I want to make sure if US want to help us, do such a help like post-Japan, not like post-Iraq and Afghanistan. We don't need to have the new tyrant. We don't need to have another dictatorship. We don't need to have king. For last 250 years, the United States never created any king because they had their fight with the kings to come up with the idea of constitutional republic. And we don't need Islam to be official religion in Iran in any type of constitution. We don't need Harvard Law School to be involved in drafting constitution for future Iran. Please, instead, let's have the Institute of World Politics to be involved in that. And with that, I want to go and ask the...
I want to just comment on one thing about ideas. You know, I started most of my professional career in the Cold War. And when I figure out, you know, when I try to explain what the heart of the Cold War was all about, I considered it ultimately to be a war between those who believe that there is a transcendent, objective, universal moral order in the world, and those who don't. And I'll put it another way. Those who believe that there are objective moral standards, standards of right and wrong, that apply to all people at all times, in all places. And then there are those who reject the existence of those objective standards. Now, who rejects them? You know, those who reject it, you can call them, the philosophers call them moral relativists, okay? Where their moral code is established according to their personal preferences. That means financial, political power, social prestige, sensual preferences, and of course, in a society that's filled with moral relativists who reject, in other words, objective standards, how are the moral standards established? In a more civilized place, it's through elections, but ultimately, it is through power struggle. And it is the people with the biggest guns and the greatest will to use them who are the ones who establish the moral code of the society. And so, take a look at all the tyrannies of this world. The communists, the fascists, the Nazis, and the radical Islamists like this mullah regime, okay? All of these are based on a morality that they claim to be religious. They claim to have the God's morality running them, but in fact, their moral code is set according to their personal preferences. And so, one of the things about the American system is that, you know, if you believe that there is an objective moral order, then you will, the consequence of that is a political system very much like America's. Because we have this concept in our Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Is that Creator the God of Abraham? Not necessarily. It could be. Is it, you know, it's not, you know, is it Allah? You know, who is it? The founders were very careful to make sure that many different faiths could accommodate this And the result is that we have inalienable rights. The rights do not come from men. Do not come from the Democratic Party. They don't come from the Constitution. The Constitution is there to protect rights, but not to give rights. And what is a right in the first place? It is a just claim. It is something that is due you justly according to, by virtue of your humanity. But you cannot, basically, if it is men that give rights to other men, they can never be unconditional because of the passions of men. And so it's the only time you can have majority rule with inalienable, unconditional minority rights is when the rights come from a higher authority. Either they inhere in nature or they come from a higher moral intelligence that some of us call God. And you can have different interpretations of that. And this is one of the amazing things about the American system. And so ultimately, you're going to be facing a conflict of whether your laws, the laws of Iran, are going to be man-made laws or whether they will derive from the natural law, the higher law. And you can have a constitution, but then there can be interpretations of the Constitution that will permit slavery. It happened in this country. But there was something that told people, oh, wait a minute. There's a higher law than what that interpretation of the Constitution is, and which makes us understand it deeply in our hearts that slavery is fundamentally unjust. And I think that we cannot forget these fundamental philosophical issues.
There's another phrase that we might keep in mind that would cover all of this, I think. Nature's law and nature's God.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's very important because the American founding fathers, definitely they were genius. It's a Christian nation, but as my friend Professor Alan Dershowitz mentioned, they didn't want to invoke God. In the United States Constitution, you cannot find the word God. You cannot find the word Jesus or Christianity. In the United States Constitution, you know how many times the word Islam and Allah and all these are in the Iranian Constitution? More than 500 times. Islam is 206 times there. And look what happened to Iran there. When you are invoking God, invoking ideology, and this is not the constitution anymore. I mentioned in my book, two poisons will kill any constitution. Absolutism, which can be the supreme leader's absolutism, or king's absolutism, or official religion. Why official religion? Because if Islam is the official in the constitution, not everybody in Iran are Muslim. Even if one person is not Muslim, the constitution should look at everybody equal. If you have official religion, you don't have equality anymore. The constitution is gone. And how come those people at Harvard Law School didn't understand that and they were calling themselves constitutional law professors? I can't get it. You wanted to ask the first question. Go ahead. I'm sorry, too long. And just
So, this is Reza Hamzeh. I'm a professor of economics, and I have seen 2 revolutions so far, 3 wars, and the first one, if everybody remembers, 75% of Iranians voted for Khomeini and Islamic Republic. All of them, most of them, are dead sorry about what they did. Needless to say, that revolution was really manufactured by Carter and Giscard d'Estaing of France. They paid for Khomeini to stay in France and live, very comfortably, and eventually was sent to Iran. And of course, Iranian people were so mad and sad about the situation that but a very large majority of people were not necessarily doing well. Having said that, as Omar Khatizyan and Abbas Milani and very well-known Iranian scholars have mentioned, we've had the best economy during the Shah's time. So that's another thing, economic growth and everything. So I want to say this. First of all, I believe in thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So to respond to the wonder that Amir quite properly mentioned, we are now asking ourselves, now what? It is happening. I believe that we cannot copy the constitutions of France or United States because each country had its own characteristics, as you mentioned very well, elaborated very well. Our Arab friends here from Mujahideen, another person from Kurdistan. First of all, I'm impressed that you brought all these people together because
it's not easy, trust me.
But it gives me more perspectives because, I was.
These people are ready to give each other.
Let me finish because I wanted to talk for a long time, but understandably I will. I want to mention certain things. Arabs, even during Reza Shah, Sheikh Hazal was the leader of the movement. During Muhammad Reza Shah, when Iran was in the best economic conditions probably, we still had problem of Sistan and Balochistan who were living under the worst conditions ever, and they are still. And when we look at Kurdistan, Kurdistan, in my opinion, is a story of heroism because they tolerated, they fought for years for their independence and existence, really. I'm not a Kurd, I'm not an Arab, I'm not a Mujahid, actually. I disagree with Mujahideen, but I respect all of the freedom fighters at the time. But the point that I want to make, these minorities, first of all, management of minorities is the biggest challenge in anywhere in the world, including the United States. See what you're, seeing, observing, experiencing about minorities. So, my point is this. If you want to do something right, as Americans say, we'd better start on the right foot. This is the time that you guys have done, I admire you very much, to join a bigger movement of Iranians that let's write together with all people from all, walks of life to discuss what really answers to the question of minorities, of Arabs, of Azerbaijanis. There are too many jokes in Iran intentionally made for putting down certain minorities. We have to stop that. So,
to help you to get at the question, let's put it that way. You said we cannot copy United States Constitution. Why not using it as a framework? I want to just, Dr. Najovsky tell us that. Because if you're asking me, if I want to buy a phone, I'm not going to say, okay, let's go and make a phone. I'm going to buy, first of all, iPhone. Because it's working. For the last 2.5 centuries, this iPhone, the United States Constitution, worked. And the entire planet, they followed that. And
this is my bigger picture. My bigger picture is thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Not that big. No. Forget about Marx or anybody. Whatever makes sense. Let me give you a very fast example. One of my doctoral students views and then my witnesses. Yes, I said, where is your other parts? So my point is not US is one of the best role model for our democracy.
Use it as a role model.
But not copy. See, they didn't have
But the framework is not
problem. They didn't have the Arab problem. We have certain problems that we have to use them in economics. Let me resemble this. We have holding companies. Holding companies are what? A bunch of independently run, dependent, and commonly owned by the people. So federalism, to my eyes, I wanted to double check, is that's the parent company if the whole nation is a company. But Kurdistan has to have, not necessarily separated from the federal government, but they have to have their democratic way of governing their state.
In the United States Constitution?
That's what I'm